Hello and welcome back to L07 Arts. Tis time for another of my adventures in experimenting with Unreal Engine. This one is a project I did during my game production course, after I was told that I needed to stop experimenting on my own and focus on submitting actual, accessible content based off of the given tutorials. The standard tutorials were pretty basic, mostly things like bringing in models from one program to another and placing them throughout the world, as well as adding textures and creating animation. Pretty crucial foundational stuff, but not a whole lot of fun to put together for submission, so I decided to do up a little museum for myself along the way. Each exhibit represents a different aspect of the required content, with the goal of showcasing what I'd been studying in a tangible way. Outside of this central showroom, I've developed a series of bare-bones levels according to each tutorial topic. It is purely the most quick and dirty of setups, and I could certainly do something better nowadays, but for something that was made mostly because I had to drop what I was doing and figure out what to actually submit, I think it turned out pretty well. I already have another video up on this channel highlighting my previous experimental efforts, so be sure to check that out. And now, without further ado, on with the tour. Room number 1 on our tour is the flower room. The goal was to import static mesh models from Maya to Unreal using both single models and combined packs that I had to separate and orient on my own. It wasn't easy repositioning everything to their individual zeros, but once I did, it was simply a matter of applying textures to create a set of easily placeable assets. Not much more to it, pretty flowers textured and placed. The next room is a bit more complex. On the left is a ball demonstrating the level of detail-based model switching. The further away you are, the lower poly the model being rendered is. The intent is to save on memory for things being loaded far away from the player. The mushroom on the right is an example of complex collision shaping. Simple collisions make a box around the model to push the player back, but if you want the player to be able to move around without running into an invisible wall, you need to make increasingly more complex shapes to match its surface. These next two rooms are focused on skeletal meshes. From simple models with only a single root bone for placement to more complex character models, getting Unreal to recognize their bone rigging is an important step towards functional placement. These models are ones I got from Adobe's character creator and were given animation via Mixamo. In order to get them moving, I had to import both the skeleton and animation file and link them up accordingly. For something as simple as this, it was mostly a matter of plug and play. Once the animation is loaded, it's not that hard to establish a simple reversible loop. This section was focused on creating multifaceted materials by assigning texture maps to surfaces. Materials work like paint and can be applied to either the whole model or select portions of its surface. By specifying certain polygons and assigning a material to them, it is possible to create unique, alterable patterns throughout the scene. From there, it is further possible to utilize the functions within the material editor to create simple variable displays that change values over time, adding elements such as color, illumination, opacity, reflection, and refraction as needed. All it takes is adding the right nodes in the right places. But that is only the start of what we can do with this. From there, we touch upon the process of creating animated textures. Creating 2D animation in Unreal Engine isn't all that difficult. It is simply a matter of setting your timing, how many frames the animation runs, and turning it into a flipbook. For this example, I decided to make use of the first piece of motion picture ever filmed. The process of flipbooking works by loading in every frame of the sequence in one texture file, which is then broken down into smaller squares and loaded in order according to the time that was set. All that remains is to plug it in accordingly and adjusting the values to taste. Pretty simple, right? But we can go even further from there. The next step is adding another dimension. This can be used to add wind and other such forces into the scene. This one is a bit more complex in layout, but easy enough to pull off. It is mostly a matter of tracking between the world position and the actor position, while using a sign to provide constant shifting values that can be subtly tweaked according to need. Transparent textures are then used to mask the edges of any items that might be distorted along the way. This room is centered on creating player sprites. Inside of a game, the player controls a pawn, which calls up a playable model for use. Creating the individual pawns is as simple as creating a blank master file and switching between skeletal meshes inside the blueprint editor for each one. It is easy to create just as many instances as you need. To make them functional as player pieces, the basic code for movement and look control is all that's needed to be shared across the master. On its own, this will result in a static Roomba, so you need to add some animation to the pawn. Creating character animation isn't all that difficult. You just need a variety of animation states to call upon according to occasion. Bringing in compatible animations on their own may serve its purpose when it comes to the NPCs, but the player character is in need of a little more. In order to create real-time movement, the player pawn has to be equipped with an animation blueprint containing each piece of necessary animation. The bare minimum necessary is a set of states covering stopping, in motion, and idle for left, right, and center. From there it is a matter of using a blend space to shift between each state according to velocity and angle. With those values, an animation blueprint can be created to call upon as the player moves. The animation blueprint receives real-time data from the player pawn to retrieve the angle and velocity, as well as states such as jumping and idling. It is possible to create animation states to match whatever input the player provides. All of this serves to breathe more life into the active piece. And here we reach the final stop on our tour. My very shaky attempt to put everything into practice in one spot is the most basic of basic platformers. Every fall or hit sends you back to the start to try it all over again. It is a far cry from what I'd call a well thought out level, but for something I threw together purely because I couldn't wrap my head around how to submit the in-class requirements, it serves its purpose. The main goal is just to have a bit of fun after all the basic, follow the path exercises that took up the bulk of the first 6 weeks of the course material, most of which I crammed together in the final few weeks before the due date. I can understand why my avant-garde personal experiments, documented in my previous video, link in the description below, perplexed the grading criteria, so it was a given that I'd have to do exactly what was listed. But still, it's a bit hard to just hand in something so basic without comment, and the final result often looks like nothing at all. That's why I made this tour. It was my attempt to liven things up in a way that allowed me to express myself a bit more creatively. I wanted to do something interesting with my time that went beyond what was merely presented in the tutorials. Learning the fundamentals are important for any student, but doing so can only take you so far. You need to be able to put them into practice. I'd like to think that I did. Hopefully you've all made it this far and found something you found interesting along the way. If you did, do not hesitate to leave a comment telling me what it was. I always love hearing from people, so I'm curious to see what you have to say. If you have the time, be sure to subscribe and check out some more of my other content. Thank you for taking this tour. See you in the next video.